How to write a critique? Well, first of all, a critique is a piece of writing that evaluates someone else's work. So if you're going to be evaluating someone else's essay, for example, then you're going to be writing about how well the author of the essay establishes and proves his or her point. All right, like any writing, or most writing at least, there's a structure, and you have an intro, a body, and a conclusion. In the introduction, you must identify what you are writing about. So you will definitely identify the author, identify the work title, the title of the work, and go ahead and identify the genre of the work too. So if you're writing about, if you're critiquing a movie, then say it's a movie. If you're critiquing a novel, then say the author, the title, and that it is a novel. And in our case, in this class, we're going to be critiquing an essay. So say the author, title, and the genre, essay. That way we, as readers who read your works later, you'll be used to clarifying what you're writing about, not just the title and author, because some authors, they write in different genres, so you can't just assume what the genre is just based by the author. And we're not always familiar with titles, so we want to make sure that it's clear. So you're clarifying not only that, but you're also going to clarify the thesis, the author's thesis. What is the main point? Because if you are going to make a judgment on this author's work, you've got to make a judgment on whether the author proved the main point. So if you don't say the main point, then you're short. You're not going to establish. You're not going to write a very good critique unless you're critiquing that main point, and especially. Also, you should also mention the points that the subpoints, that you are going to be critiquing as well and discussing in your essay. Okay, so that's basically the introduction. The body consists of, mostly it's context. One, it's context of, the knowledge that you can bring besides what's in the writing that you're judging, right? So if you have personal knowledge about the topic, or if you need to, you should go out and do some research. If you're not familiar with this topic, then you can't just necessarily, especially if you're doing a critique, you cannot just take for granted that everything the author says is truthful, is well-reasoned, of course, and you do have to make sure the author is accurate, or you should. So you should do some research as needed to make sure that the information the author is presenting to you is accurate, and you want to know why the author is even talking about this subject, so you need to have a little background knowledge. And so when you write your critique, you also need to give me, or whoever your teacher is, or your reader, whoever your reader is, needs to have some background information before you start just saying what the author said. Because after you give that background information about the topic, you will then summarize what the author said. So you'll make light of the context, and then you will summarize the author's paper, and that's more context, really. It's two different kinds of context. One is sort of outside resources, whether it's your personal knowledge or your research, and the other is going to be from the author's writing itself. And so summarize that, and then another part of the body actually is going to be your critique itself. As I say this, I'm going to take back what I said. Maybe all of this context is really an extension of the introduction. Doesn't matter how you look at it, but you need the intro with identifying information, establishing the ideas that you're going to be writing about, and then you're going to maybe segue into the body with the context. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so the next part of the paper is really your critique, and there's a couple parts of your critique as well. So your critique it'll be a combination of positives and negatives, and maybe some indifferences, but mostly it's going to be positives and negatives. You're going to be complimenting or supporting how well the author does certain things. Like you might support that the author is very clear on the thesis, or that the author is very organized and structured and is very systematic about explaining certain things. Not sure what you are going to compliment the author with, but those are some examples. You're going to take several paragraphs to do that, as well as criticize in a negative way what the author gets wrong or does wrong, is unclear about what the author uses when the author uses faulty reasoning and makes mistakes, loses your attention for some reason. So between all of this criticism, positive and negative, it's going to be several paragraphs. You could, now some critiques really go from the positive parts of the essay that she's critiquing, to a few paragraphs of that, and then, or however many it takes, right? Could be lots, to several paragraphs of negative criticism. Of course, you could weave those in between each other, and so you could start with something positive, and then something negative, and if those, let's say, are related to each other, and then another positive and another negative, if those are related to each other as well. But it depends on how you structure, what works best for your critique. So several paragraphs doing that. In your negative critique, part of your critique, you would point out things like, lack of clarity. If the thesis is not clear, for example, that's a super bad problem. If definitions aren't clear, like let's, for example, say that, let me use a super easy example. The word hit can mean a number of things, ranging from a hit in baseball, the batter gets on base after, the hit, to someone killing someone else for money. That's another kind of a hit. And of course there are numerous other hits in the English language, but it's a simple example. Now, when you're writing, when you're criticizing something, it's going to be more complicated than that usually. So are there phrases that the audience might be unfamiliar with? Any audience, the audience of the original author, are you unfamiliar with some of the ways that things are said? If so, the author has not succeeded in explaining that the author does need to define things that are unclear, and so that way, us as readers, we don't get lost in the language. Also, when the reasoning is out there in this critique, in the essay that you're critiquing, the reasoning needs to be clear. So, does one thing follow another logically, or does the author just assume that you saw the connection between A and C? If not, the author should bring in B, so there's A, B, C, and that way we follow the reasoning. Sometimes there is reasoning that is understood, like parts, like B might be understood, so A could jump to C. So that's not always true. Things like faulty reasoning should be pointed out, as I said. Let's see. oversimplifications, if the author is oversimplifying, or let's say using also emotionally loaded terms that are, just asking us to feel sympathetic toward their purpose. Emotion is okay, but the logic needs to be there too. We cannot rely on emotion alone. All right. So, of course, you can't just rely on this 15-minute video or whatever it ends up being. Certainly do the studying and the other resources that we have. But so that's a few of the things that you'll do in the body of the essay. And, of course, you also need a conclusion. And so you'll basically summarize whether the author succeeded in the purpose, whatever it was, whether whether the argument is valid. And so you'll assess the author, the success, and remind me, the reader, whoever the reader is, of the strengths and the weaknesses of the paper in the summary, in the conclusion. Summarize the strengths and weaknesses. So that's about it in 11 and a half minutes.